mystery that is not unconnected to the genetic mystery. It's been known by archaeologists for quite a long time that there are anomalous...
What if everything you were taught about the Aztecs was only half the story? For centuries, they've been painted as brutal warriors who vanished into history. But now, scientists are reopening graves, scanning ancient remains, and reading a code that was never meant to be decoded. Aztec DNA. What they found doesn't just challenge textbooks, it unsettles them. Hidden inside this genetic blueprint are clues to origins that don't match the official narrative, signs of migrations no one can explain, and biological markers that suggest the Aztecs were shaped by forces far more complex and far darker than we imagined. This isn't myth or legend. This is hard science colliding with buried history. Before we reveal what the DNA exposes, ask yourself this. If a civilization's true identity was erased on purpose, who made sure it stayed hidden? And if you're ready to uncover truths history tried to erase, hit like, subscribe, and stay with us, because once you hear what scientists uncovered, you'll never see the Aztecs the same way again. Picture yourself as an archaeologist, carefully digging through the ruins of an ancient Aztec city. You uncover pottery, jewelry, maybe even traces of gold. Incredible finds, but none of them can tell the full story the way a tiny piece of bone can. That's exactly the situation scientists faced when they finally gained access to ancient DNA taken from Aztec sites across Mexico. For decades, historians have debated where the Aztecs truly came from. The familiar version of the story says this: a nomadic people known as the Mexica journeyed south from a legendary homeland called Aztlan, settling in the Valley of Mexico around 1300 CE. There, they built the awe-inspiring city of Tenochtitlan on an island in Lake Texcoco and went on to form one of the most powerful empires in the Americas. But then science stepped in, and things took a turn. When geneticists began examining DNA from ancient Aztec remains, the results were not what anyone expected. Instead of a straightforward tale of migration and empire building, the evidence pointed to something far more tangled and far more unsettling. The turning point came when researchers successfully extracted mitochondrial DNA from bones discovered in Tlatelolco, the sister city of Tenochtitlan. Mitochondrial DNA acts like a genetic passport, passed down through the maternal line, offering rare insight into ancient ancestry and population movements. What it revealed was shocking. The genetic markers didn't line up with the clean, orderly origin story taught for generations. Instead, they exposed a complex web of migrations, conquests, and what appears to be large-scale genetic replacement. And this was only the start. As scientists analyzed more DNA from sites across central Mexico, a disturbing pattern began to surface, one that threatens to rewrite everything we thought we knew about pre-Columbian America, the population that disappeared without a trace. Now, here's where our story takes a dark turn. Remember that beautiful lake city of Zultipek I mentioned? Well, it turns out this place holds one of the most chilling genetic mysteries in Mesoamerican history. Before the Aztecs came to power, Zultipek was the thriving capital of the Otomi people. These weren't just some small village dwellers. We're talking about a sophisticated civilization with their own language, culture, and political system. They had been living in the Valley of Mexico for centuries, minding their own business. When the Aztecs showed up with big plans for expansion, what happened next has puzzled historians for generations. One day, the Otomi people were there living their lives, trading, building, creating art. Then, seemingly overnight, they vanished from the historical record. Poof, gone. Just like that. For years, researchers had two main theories about what happened to these missing people. Theory number one: they peacefully assimilated with the Aztecs, intermarried, and became part of the growing empire. Theory number two: they packed up their belongings and moved away to avoid conflict, settling somewhere else in Mexico. Both theories sounded reasonable enough. After all, when powerful empires expand, smaller groups often have to make tough choices about their future. But when scientists started analyzing DNA from Zultipek, they uncovered evidence that suggests the reality was far more sinister. The genetic data revealed something that sent chills down researchers' spines. The DNA samples from before the Aztec conquest showed one clear genetic signature, the typical markers you'd expect from the Otomi population. But samples from after the conquest told a completely different story. The original Otomi genetic markers had virtually disappeared. In their place, researchers found DNA signatures that matched populations from hundreds of miles away. It was as if the entire original population had been replaced by completely different people. This wasn't gradual change through intermarriage or cultural assimilation. This was wholesale population replacement. The implications are staggering and deeply unsettling when DNA reveals a darker truth. Let me paint you a picture of what these DNA findings really mean. Imagine if aliens came to your hometown tomorrow and within a few years, genetic tests showed that everyone living there had completely different ancestry than the original inhabitants. That's essentially what the evidence suggests happened in Zultipek and potentially dozens of other pre-Aztec cities. The University of Texas researchers who led this groundbreaking study didn't mince words about their findings. They discovered that the Aztec conquest didn't just change political boundaries or cultural practices. It fundamentally altered the genetic landscape of central Mexico in ways that were previously unimaginable. But here's what makes this discovery even more disturbing. This pattern of genetic replacement wasn't limited to just one city. As more ancient DNA samples were analyzed from sites across the former Aztec Empire, similar patterns began to emerge. Original populations with distinct genetic signatures were systematically replaced by people with different ancestral backgrounds. The scale of this genetic transformation suggests something that goes way beyond normal conquest and assimilation. We're talking about what researchers are now calling demographic replacement, a fancy scientific term for what might have been one of the largest population displacements in pre-Columbian American history. Think about the logistics of this for a moment. To completely replace the genetic signature of an entire region requires moving massive numbers of people over vast distances. The Aztecs weren't just conquering territory and ruling over existing populations. They were actively reshaping the demographic makeup of central Mexico. Some researchers have started using terms like genetic colonization to describe what they're seeing in the DNA data. This wasn't just military conquest. This was systematic population replacement on a scale that rivals some of the most dramatic demographic shifts in human history. The more scientists dig into these genetic patterns, the more questions arise about the true nature of Aztec expansion and what it meant for the millions of people who were living in central Mexico before the empire reached its peak. The migration mystery, hidden in their genes. Now let's talk about one of the biggest plot twists in this genetic detective story. Remember how I mentioned that the Aztecs claimed to come from a mythical homeland called Aztlan? Well, DNA evidence is now suggesting that this wasn't just mythology. It might have been the key to understanding one of the largest population movements in pre-Columbian America. Recent genetic studies have identified something that has archaeologists absolutely buzzing with excitement: distinct Y chromosome haplogroups that can be traced across vast distances in the Americas. These genetic markers are like breadcrumbs that ancient populations left behind as they moved across the landscape. What researchers discovered is that the genetic diversity among Aztec descendants is absolutely enormous, way more diverse than you'd expect from a single founding population. We're talking about haplogroups labeled Q-M242, Q-M3, Q-Z768, Q-L663, Q-Z780, and Q-PV3. These aren't just random letters and numbers, they're genetic signatures that tell the story of multiple waves of migration and population mixing on a truly massive scale. The implications are staggering. This genetic diversity suggests that what we call the Aztecs weren't actually a single people at all. Instead, they appear to have been a complex coalition of different groups with varying genetic backgrounds who came together to form what became the Aztec Empire. But here's where things get really interesting and more than a little disturbing. The genetic evidence suggests that these different groups didn't come together through peaceful alliance or gradual cultural mixing. Instead, the DNA patterns indicate rapid, large-scale population movements that coincided with the disappearance of original inhabitants from sites across central Mexico. Some geneticists are now theorizing that the Aztec expansion involved organized population transfers on a scale that's hard to comprehend. Imagine coordinating the movement of hundreds of thousands of people across hundreds of miles of challenging terrain. The logistical complexity alone would have required a level of organization and planning that rivals modern military operations. The empire's hidden methods. Here's where our story takes its darkest turn yet. As more DNA evidence has come to light, researchers have started piecing together what might be one of the most systematic campaigns of population displacement in pre-Columbian American history. The genetic data doesn't just show that original populations disappeared, it shows exactly what replaced them. And the pattern is chillingly consistent across multiple sites. Original inhabitants with distinct local genetic signatures were replaced by people carrying genetic markers from the Aztec heartland and allied regions. This wasn't random migration or gradual demographic change. The genetic evidence suggests a coordinated effort to reshape the population structure of conquered territories. Some researchers are now using terms like genetic imperialism to describe what they're seeing in the DNA data. But what happened to all those original inhabitants? The genetic evidence suggests several possibilities, none of them particularly comforting. Some populations may have been forcibly relocated to distant regions of the empire. Others might have been absorbed into the Aztec military and administrative system, scattered across the empire to prevent local resistance. However, there's a third possibility that researchers are reluctant to discuss openly, but that the genetic evidence increasingly supports: systematic elimination of local populations. The complete disappearance of certain genetic lineages from specific regions suggests demographic catastrophes that go far beyond what you'd expect from normal conquest and assimilation. Recent studies of Y chromosome diversity in Aztec descendant populations have revealed something particularly disturbing. Certain genetic lineages that should be present, based on pre-conquest populations, are completely missing from modern descendants. It's as if entire family lines simply vanished from the genetic record. This pattern of missing genetic lineages isn't random. It's concentrated in regions that were key targets of Aztec expansion. The implications are deeply unsettling and suggest that the Aztec Empire's rise to power came at a human cost that historians are only now beginning to understand. What the genetic code actually tells us. Let's dive deeper into what the actual DNA is telling us, because the scientific details make this story even more incredible and disturbing. When researchers analyze ancient DNA, they're looking for specific genetic markers that can tell them about population relationships, migration patterns, and demographic changes over time. In the case of the Aztec studies, they've been focusing on two main types of genetic material: mitochondrial DNA, which tracks maternal lineages, and Y chromosome DNA, which tracks paternal lineages. The mitochondrial DNA from Tlatelolco revealed something that left scientists stunned. The genetic signatures showed clear connections to populations from much farther north than previously expected. We're talking about genetic markers that link Aztec populations to groups that lived hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles away in what is now the southwestern United States. This discovery has completely revolutionized our understanding of pre-Columbian population movements. The genetic evidence suggests that the ancestors of the Aztecs undertook migrations of truly epic proportions, journeys that would have taken generations to complete and required crossing some of the most challenging terrain in North America. But here's what makes this even more remarkable. The genetic data shows that these migrations weren't gradual, peaceful movements of small groups over long periods. Instead, the DNA patterns suggest rapid, large-scale population movements that happened over relatively short time frames. Y chromosome analysis has revealed even more shocking details. The paternal genetic diversity in Aztec descendant populations is so enormous that it can only be explained by the incorporation of multiple distinct population groups over a very short period. This isn't the genetic signature of a single conquering people. It's the signature of a massive demographic reorganization. Some of the most recent genetic studies have identified specific haplogroups that appear to have been introduced to central Mexico during the height of Aztec expansion. These genetic markers weren't present in pre-Aztec populations, but suddenly appear in large numbers during the imperial period. The timing and distribution of these genetic changes paint a picture of systematic population management on a scale that rivals anything seen in recorded history. The Aztecs weren't just building an empire, they were engineering the genetic landscape of Mesoamerica. When history books got it wrong, the implications of these DNA discoveries go far beyond just updating textbooks. We're talking about fundamentally rethinking one of the most important civilizations in human history. For generations, the Aztec Empire has been portrayed as a relatively straightforward story of military conquest and cultural assimilation. The traditional narrative goes something like this. A skilled warrior, people expanded their territory, conquered their neighbors, and created a tribute-based empire that lasted until the Spanish arrival. But the genetic evidence is forcing historians to confront a much more complex and troubling reality. The DNA doesn't support the idea of peaceful assimilation or gradual cultural mixing. Instead, it suggests systematic demographic engineering on a massive scale. Think about what this means for our understanding of pre-Columbian America. We've always known that the Aztecs were efficient conquerors, but the genetic evidence suggests they were also masters of population control and demographic manipulation. They weren't just building an empire, they were reshaping the human landscape of central Mexico. This revelation has sparked intense debates among researchers. Some argue that the genetic evidence proves the Aztecs were even more sophisticated than previously believed, capable of organizing and executing population transfers that required incredible logistical planning and administrative capability. Others see the DNA findings as evidence of a much darker legacy. The systematic replacement of local populations with people carrying Aztec-allied genetic markers suggests a level of demographic control that raises troubling questions about the empire's methods and motivations. Recent studies have also begun to examine how these population changes affected cultural and linguistic diversity in pre-Columbian Mexico. The genetic replacement seems to have coincided with the disappearance of local languages, artistic traditions, and religious practices. Entire cultural legacies appear to have vanished along with their genetic signatures. The University of Texas researchers who first identified these patterns have called for a complete re-evaluation of Aztec imperial policy. Their findings suggest that what we've been calling conquest might be better described as demographic colonization, a systematic effort to replace local populations with people loyal to the Aztec system. The bigger picture, nobody expected now. Let's zoom out and think about what these discoveries mean for our understanding of human civilization more broadly. The genetic evidence from Aztec sites isn't just changing our view of one empire. It's forcing us to reconsider how powerful states have managed populations throughout history. The scale and systematic nature of the population changes revealed by DNA analysis suggests that the Aztecs developed techniques for demographic control that were remarkably sophisticated. We're talking about the ability to coordinate the movement and placement of hundreds of thousands of people across vast territories, a logistical achievement that rivals anything attempted by modern governments. But there's a darker side to this sophistication. The genetic evidence suggests that the Aztecs may have been pioneers in what we would now recognize as ethnic cleansing and forced population transfer. The complete disappearance of certain genetic lineages from conquered territories implies demographic policies that went far beyond traditional conquest and tribute collection. Recent archaeological evidence has begun to support what the genetic data has been telling us. Excavations at former Aztec sites have revealed patterns of rapid cultural change that align perfectly with the genetic evidence of population replacement. New architectural styles, pottery types, and burial practices appear suddenly in the archaeological record, suggesting the arrival of entirely new populations rather than gradual cultural evolution. Some researchers have started drawing comparisons between Aztec demographic policies and similar practices in other ancient empires. The Assyrians, for example, were famous for their policy of forcibly relocating conquered populations to prevent rebellion. The genetic evidence suggests the Aztecs may have perfected similar techniques centuries before European contact. The implications extend beyond just ancient history. Understanding how the Aztecs managed population diversity and territorial control provides insights that are relevant to modern discussions about migration, cultural assimilation, and state power. The DNA evidence shows us what demographic engineering looks like in the genetic record, and it's not pretty. These findings are also raising new questions about the Spanish conquest of Mexico. If the Aztecs had already systematically displaced and replaced local populations across their empire, it might explain why Spanish conquistadors encountered less local resistance than they expected in some regions. Areas that had recently undergone population replacement might have lacked the deep cultural and genetic ties to specific territories that usually fuel resistance movements. The technology that exposed the truth. The techniques that scientists are using to uncover these genetic secrets represent a revolution in how we study ancient civilizations. Ancient DNA analysis has become so sophisticated that researchers can now track population movements, identify family relationships, and even determine dietary practices from bone fragments that are hundreds or thousands of years old. The breakthrough that made the Aztec discoveries possible came from advances in extracting and analyzing degraded genetic material. DNA deteriorates rapidly after death, especially in tropical climates like central Mexico. For decades, scientists struggled to get usable genetic information from Mesoamerican archaeological sites. But new techniques for cleaning and amplifying ancient DNA have opened up possibilities that seemed like science fiction just a few years ago. Researchers can now extract genetic information from bone fragments so small and degraded that previous generations of scientists would have dismissed them as useless. The Tlatelolco study that revealed the first evidence of Aztec population replacement used cutting-edge techniques to analyze mitochondrial DNA from burial sites that had been excavated decades earlier. Bone fragments that had been sitting in storage rooms suddenly became treasure troves of genetic information. Y chromosome analysis has provided even more dramatic insights. Unlike mitochondrial DNA, which only tracks maternal lineages, Y chromosome data can reveal patterns of male migration and population structure. The results from Aztec sites have been so surprising that some researchers initially questioned whether the genetic signatures they were seeing could be real. The enormous diversity of Y chromosome haplogroups in Aztec descendant populations was completely unexpected. Traditional models of population growth and expansion predicted much less genetic diversity. The actual data suggests demographic processes that were far more complex and dramatic than anyone had imagined. Recent advances in ancient DNA analysis have also made it possible to extract genetic information from unexpected sources. Hair fragments, tooth enamel, and even soil samples from archaeological sites can now provide genetic information about ancient populations. These new sources of DNA are filling in gaps in our understanding and revealing population changes that were previously invisible. The combination of improved extraction techniques and more powerful analytical methods means that genetic studies of ancient populations are just getting started. Every new batch of DNA results seems to reveal more surprises about the complexity of pre-Columbian demographic patterns. What the scientists are actually saying. Among scientists, the reaction to these DNA discoveries has been a mix of excitement and real unease. The genetic evidence is so strong and so consistent that it can't be brushed aside. But what it suggests is forcing researchers to question some of the most basic assumptions about how ancient civilizations grew, ruled, and expanded. Dr. Deborah Bolnick, one of the lead researchers involved in the University of Texas studies, has stressed the importance of viewing genetic data alongside archaeology and historical records. At the same time, she's been clear about one thing. The DNA results are pushing scholars to seriously rethink Aztec imperial strategies and the consequences those policies had on local populations. What's striking is how persuasive the evidence has become. Even researchers who initially doubted the conclusions are now acknowledging that something extraordinary occurred during Aztec expansion. The scale and organized nature of the population shifts revealed through DNA analysis go far beyond anything traditional archaeology had previously suggested. Experts in ancient DNA from around the world have praised the scientific rigor of the Mesoamerican studies, while also voicing concern about what the findings imply. The genetic patterns found at Aztec sites don't resemble those seen in other ancient civilizations, hinting that the Aztecs may have used unusually distinct methods of population control and territorial management. This has led some researchers to call for broader genetic studies across other Mesoamerican cultures. Early DNA work from Maya sites has shown hints of similar trends, though those results are still under close review. The discoveries have also caught the attention of scholars studying other great empires. New genetic projects are being planned at Roman, Chinese, and Persian sites to explore whether large-scale population replacement was a common feature of empire building, or something uniquely intense in the Americas. There are critics, of course. Some argue that ancient DNA can be unevenly preserved and may reflect biased samples, but the consistency of results across multiple locations and different genetic markers has convinced most experts that these population changes were real, deliberate, and widespread. At this point, the debate is no longer about whether these genetic shifts happened. It's about what they reveal and how they fundamentally change our understanding of ancient American civilizations and the true mechanics of their power. The truth that DNA cannot hide. Recent discoveries in Aztec DNA reveal a hidden history of large-scale population replacement, showing that the empire's power was built not only on military conquest, but also on deliberate demographic engineering. Genetic evidence uncovers vanished groups like the Otomi of Zultipek and highlights the diverse ancestry of modern descendants, painting a picture of cultural upheaval and human loss that archaeology alone had not captured. These findings underscore how genetic research is reshaping our understanding of ancient civilizations, exposing the profound human cost behind the rise of empires. The DNA doesn't lie. It reveals a story of systematic population control, forced migrations, and the erasure of entire peoples, a truth that has been buried in graves for over 500 years but can no longer be hidden. What do you think about these shocking DNA discoveries? Do they change how you view the Aztec Empire and its legacy? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know what aspect of this genetic detective story surprised you the most.